My name is Bruce Newell, and I graduated Belmont High School in 1958. I was in the Army. Well, I was a graduate from ROTC program, so my basic training camp was between my junior and senior year, and it was in Fort Benning, Georgia, which was filled with red clay, if those of infantry people will remember. And that's where I went for my basic officers training corps. Well, I enlisted. In those days, when you became a sophomore in college, you had to make a decision to either not continue. In the school I went to had a military. You had to be in the ROTC program for the first 2 years. Not true in a lot of schools, but in the particular school I went to, that was a compulsory training. And at that time, you made a decision whether you were going to continue and go into the service. And once you did that, you basically enlisted for your junior and senior year. And at that particular time, once you enlisted, you were in. So if you dropped out of college, you would go directly into the service for training as an enlisted man. Once you graduated under the ROTC program, they sent you to a specific branch school. The particular branch I was in, fortunately for me, was the Adjutant General Corps, which was ran the business of the military, and that was in Indianapolis, Indiana, Fort Benjamin Harrison. It was different. You had classes in the military subjects. You wore your uniform once a week for drill, and at the particular school that I was in, and it was early, this was in the '61, the really anti-Vietnam War incident hadn't really got going until I was probably a senior and was in the service. I was trained to go to colleges and recruit officers for the Army, which by the time of 1964 came, no longer was allowed. So no military was allowed on all college campuses for that purpose. I served in Jacksonville, Florida. I was stationed in what they call an AFIS station, which was the Armed Forces entry station, where when you were drafted or enlisted, you went for your physical examination, your testing, and everything else, and that's where I served. It was on the base of the Jacksonville Naval Air Station. So the toughest part of the job I had was, number one, I had to go a couple of times and tell a parent and a spouse that their son or husband had died in Vietnam. I only had to do that twice, thank God. It was a terrible, terrible experience, but I did plan a lot of military funerals, because once they were told of the casualty, then you had to go in and plan and arrange for the body to come in and everything else. So this was the toughest part of what I did when I was stationed there. Well, when I was in the military in Florida, it was a different part of the world, and it was a very highly many military bases in the Jacksonville area, mostly naval bases. So I never really received some anti-war type reactions to my service. However, if you get back to this part of the world, when I came back, there was some anti-war, but it was different, because once you left that base, you never wore a uniform. You were never seen in uniform, because of this anti-war type thing going on, and so it was a lot different. And I always say it's a very interesting period of time, because a lot of those people were drafted and served in the service really not at their own decision, and I dealt with that. And they were held in very low esteem, even though that wasn't their choice. Where now a soldier is, as you see, applauded and recognized, and they're all volunteers, where then I think it was 25% were just didn't want to go. Believe me, they didn't want to go because I put them in. So it's quite a different experience. you got to remember now, we're talking about the draft. So as I went to college, and I had worked a few years before I'd gone, 2 years, that I think my father was, my father and parents recognized that it was a necessity thing. I don't know if they were overly patriotic, but they were patriotic. My father served in World War II as a Coast Guard reservist, which basically meant he guarded the Providence Harbor. Well, in those days, you got to remember that I had a 2-year active duty commitment, and then I had spent 2 years in the an active reserve unit, which meant I went once a month and 2 weeks in the summer. And I was stationed at the Boston Army base, where my reserve was, and then we went out to various places for our training. And then once I actually went on with my career right after I got out of the service. I ended up in the financial business. I worked on a stock exchange. That's what I did, ran a trading operation. In my case, again, you have to, and I want to point this out, that you realize I really wasn't exposed mainly to the things I mentioned earlier as far as the war went. And so my transition was not very difficult, I got to be honest with you. However, I had friends who were veterans and a relative who was a veteran. It had some difficulty, but overall my experience was not too bad. I was always an always firm believer that military training was a really strong part of my life, and I felt that I learned a tremendous amount, and that maybe some type of, it's very hard to say now when there's active wars and things going on, that some type of military training, compulsory training, would be a benefit to a lot of a reality check. You got to understand that I was from a small town in New England, from an upper middle class family, and I heard about all the things that were happening, from racial things to all that was going on. And until I went to that officers training corps in Fort Benning, Georgia, I had never seen it. There I saw it, where honestly I was clearly not one of the leaders in that course. I was not a military type, and yet I saw some people were from the University of Puerto Rico. They were better than me. I was always ranked higher than them, and it was clearly, purely a racial look at that particular time. I think today it's again, you have to evaluate your own goals, your own needs, and what you want to do, and realize is that it is a tremendous learning experience, but you're stepping into a very dangerous part, and that you have to realize before you make that decision all the aspects of what military is. I'm for some type of military training, however.